Well, hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name's Joe and today we're going to be talking about the water pump on the Mitsubishi 3000 GT, GTO, VR4, GTSL and the Dodge Stealth. Now this particular pump we're covering today is only for the V6 double overhead cam models. It comes in two versions depending on how rich you are. If you buy direct from Mitsubishi, it will normally come with this back plate on, but it's about $200 more than the aftermarket ones, which are identical in almost every single way, but they don't come with the backing plate. So when you come to replace your pump, you're going to take the backing plate off the old one and simply put it onto the new one. Now the pump that Mitsubishi uses on this car is known as a centrifugal pump, and it spins, and as it spins, by the way, the spinning is controlled by the cam belt, so as it spins, the pump inside will draw water into the center and then force it outwards at a higher pressure to go back into the engine. Now it's quite a clever little mechanism. It's very simple. There's nothing really to go wrong with it as long as you use proper maintenance. Now of course, like anything that moves with very high mileage and age, sooner or later it'll wear out. But if you've used the correct coolant that's designed for this car, you're going to get about 5 times longer life out of this water pump. Most of the ones that I've ever replaced, in fact I think just about every single one I've ever replaced, is because someone has used tap water in their car. Now tap water contains a whole bunch of impurities, calciums and grit and everything you can imagine. And those things, if you've looked inside your kettle, you'll see all sorts of calcium buildup. And that calcium will be going round and round your car and it'll be wearing out all of the moving parts. And of course, once it starts to wear, water will leak. And it gets worse than that, because it's not only the pump you're going to destroy, it's going to be other components of the car. And you're going to go from $10 worth of correct coolant and water to probably $1,000 or more in repairs to your car from the damage. Now I'm going to show you some of that damage on an engine in just a minute. First of all, I'll tell you where the pump goes. So from the outside of your car, the pump is hidden behind the cam covers here. Now it's a really big job to do, because in order to replace the pump, you're going to have to replace the cam belt itself. And that on its own is a huge job and too much work to cover in one video. So next week we have the second competition winner called Vince. He's bringing his car and we're going to do a cam belt change on that car. But during the cam belt change, you're going to need to do your water pump change. So what we're going to do is do it in 3 parts. Part 1 will be Vince bringing his car here and a strip down to get to the cam belt and water pump. Part 2 will be this water pump change, and in part 3 will be the full reassembly with the cam belt. So if we just come over to this black car a second, this is with the cam belt all removed, ready to get to the water pump, and this is as far as you're going to need to get minimum to do the water pump. Here is your water pump located on the engine. And as you can see, there's calcium and crap built up everywhere. When the water pump starts to wear, because the water in there is leaking out, that water's going to leak onto everything else. And just give me 1 second. As that water leaks, it will leak down onto your cam belt and all of the pulleys. And so you're going to find that all of your pulleys go rusty and pitted, all the bearings go in the pulleys. This is not just for the cam belt side, but also on your auxiliary side. And so you're going to have to replace the whole lot. Even if you only had the water pump go, you're going to be talking anything between probably $50, $60 for a water pump on its own. And I think they're about $250 for the complete water pump from Mitsubishi. That's absolute minimum. If you end up having to replace all the pulleys and cam belts, you're now going to be looking at something like $1,000 or $1,200 to do the whole lot. A huge expense, so take care of your car. Simple water and coolant preparation, and you're going to get a lot longer out of it. So with that said, next step is we'll have a look at the tools. Now I have the tools ready to show you, but just before we start with the tools, I'm going to save a little bit of time by letting the water system drain now. Of course, because it's the water system we're messing with, it's going to be full up, and that's going to take a little bit of time to drain, so we'll get that going right away. The drain hole for the water is at the bottom of the radiator, which is located at the front here on the right hand side. Right at the bottom you've got this little drain plug, and by undoing that, you're going to let the water out. You can access this from your access hatches on the front of the car. Just put your hand up through the access hatch and undo the drain plug. I have to warn you, it is very tight. Even though I've got the covers off the bottom of this car, it's still quite difficult to get to. To speed up the water, just take off the filler cap and it will allow the air pressure to force it out quicker. So we'll just leave that draining while we take a look at the tools. So just a few basic tools. You may need a small pry bar to help get that water pump off. That's going to be pretty well seized on there after 30 years of use. We're going to use a torque wrench. Now this is quite new to many of my videos. As you know, all of my videos are for the man at home, and generally I try not to use professional tools. It's not essential to use this, but because we're now messing with the engine, which is a really expensive part of the car, I don't want to risk anything going wrong. So you're going to set your torque wrench to 24 Newton meters, and you're going to need a 12mm socket piece on the end. You're also going to need a 1/2 inch wrench, again with a 12mm on the end. And you're going to need a 3/8 with a 10mm on it. Now, even though I've given you these different size wrenches, you can probably get away with just using one to do all of the jobs, but I just found it easier because of some places are easier to get to with a smaller wrench. I've gone down in size, and for some of them the bolts are really tight, so I've gone up in size. You may well need a stubby extension for your large wrench, a 12mm spanner. A ratchet spanner will make the job a little bit quicker. You need a Phillips screwdriver. Now this is quite a large tipped screwdriver because you're going to need to undo one screw which has got quite a deep, large crosshead on it. And the bigger the screwdriver, the more wrenching power you're going to get on it. It's going to be quite a tight one. A rubber mallet may just help to assist in breaking the seal on some of the parts. Some RTV sealant, a sheet of wet and dry paper, and if you've got something really flat and smooth, and it must be very flat and very smooth, I've picked up a piece of granite stone which has all been milled flat. I'm going to use this, and the reason is when you separate your water pump, if you go for the 2-part option, you're going to need to clean the surface to make sure you get a perfect mirror finish so the two pieces mate back together nicely. So we're going to do that with this, and I'll show you how shortly. So that's pretty much it for the tools. The water should finish draining very shortly, and we'll get on with the job. Now I've just been reminded that this car has got the front bumper off, and that I should tell you that it's not actually necessary to remove the front bumper or the under trays from the car in order to let the water drain out of the radiator. Whichever way you do it, it's a very tight spot to get into, but you can reach it through the access hatches. If you find it just too tight for your hands, if you've got big hands, then maybe remove the under tray, but you certainly do not need to remove the front bumper. So let's start with this water pump getting it off. 12mm ratchet spanner is easier, just on that top bolt there. A very tight bolt. Then you're onto your 1/2 inch drive 12mm socket. Now with this one I've put on a short extension. You could use a deep body socket if you want. I just so happen to have grabbed this. And you've got 5 bolts to undo. Here's your first one. Now it's rather tight spacing in here. Hopefully your bolts aren't done up too tight and you'll be able to get them out. Second one is just below. Now the third one, carry on clockwise. It's just there, if you can see where my finger is. I don't know if it's possible to film from underneath. Still a little too tight. That's 3. Now we're over onto this side of the pump. 2 more. Now I'm not sure if this is the original water pump or a replacement one, because quite honestly it's very difficult to tell the difference between the original and an aftermarket one, and the colour of this centre pulley does not give you an answer, because some aftermarket ones are the same colour, some are different. Now according to the manual there's 2 lengths of this bolt. Yes there is. One is slightly shorter than the other 4. The one that is slightly shorter is the one that belongs in this top hole here, and it's really important that you put the correct bolt back in that hole, otherwise you'll find it's too long and it hits the back wall and won't do up properly. So with any luck this will just come off by hand, but that's very rare for that to happen. So here's where your pry bar comes in handy, and as you look at your water pump you have some points marked around here where you can get your tool in behind the back one to try and lever it free. If it is extremely tight, do not force it in any one point. You'll have to work your way around bit by bit. Remember it's aluminium or aluminum as some of you call it, and it will break quite easily, so you're going to use a number of different prying points to try and get that free. I see it start to move that time. There we go. I don't know who the previous owner of this car was, but they totally neglected it, which is why this car's been stripped down for a full refurbishment. Okay, we're starting to come free now. Now I know where this is stuck now. I'll quickly show you. The water pump itself has a tube that goes into here, and there's a rubber seal that goes in there. Quite often the rubber seal over time has become totally gummed up with muck, and it's hard to break it free. But a little bit of work and that will eventually come off. I've actually had them where the pipe has come undone at the other end because it's so tight on here. Let's just hope this comes free. Okay, this one's going to be a nightmare. I'm going to cut the video. I'm going to go and get a second pry bar, and then I'm going to try prying from each side to work it off. Right, just so you know, there's no trickery behind what I've done. I went and picked up myself a couple of these 18-inch tyre levers that we use for getting tyres off of vehicles, and they've got just the right angle to get in here behind that clip there, and then I got the other one down in that gap there, and between the two I worked that off. So that's what you're going to need possibly, or something similar. Now we have the water pump free to remove from the car, and you can see water has been leaking out of here. This is for the overflow, and for if there's any leaks anywhere, this is where it comes out and pours out everywhere. You can see all the rust and muck build up in here, which has all got to be cleaned out. And we've also got to remove the old gasket off the side of the engine, and that's where I'm going to start the next part of the job. So to remove the gasket, there are lots of commercial things on the market now for gasket removal, different types of tools that you can use at an angle with a blade in. Quite often I do use those, but because of the tight space and because the engine's still in the car, I'm just going to use a regular blade. And it's a very slow process now. We're not going to film the whole process. You've just got to carefully get your blade behind the gasket, and bit by bit you're going to cut it away until you have a nice clean area to put on the fresh gasket. Now remember, when you're removing the old gasket, always keep the blade at just the right angle. You don't want to cut into the metal, because any imperfections in the surface is going to allow water to leak. So get it at just that right angle where it gets underneath the gasket but does not cut into the metal. This isn't usually an easy job, and it's not usually a quick job, so I'm going to cut the video while I finish cutting all this off and join you for the next stage. Now, because I'm going to be using an aftermarket pump, I'm going to need to remove this backing plate from the pump that was originally on the car. Now, to save some video time, I'm going to leave one person cleaning off the old gasket on the engine while I clean up the gasket off this backing plate, and we'll come back to you once that's done. So we've removed the gasket from the old water pump on the engine side, and also from the water pump side itself, purely because we're going to reuse this casing. Now we've got to separate the two halves of the casing, and that involves one large screw on this side and 5 10mm bolts on the other side. So we'll start with this side. Now this one is usually done up extremely tight, but if yours is done up tight, I'll show you how to free it off. Let's first of all try with a screwdriver, get it nice and tight into the hole, and if you've got enough muscle, that'll go, which this one won't, as I expected. Now if that doesn't feel like it's going to go, or if it feels like the head of the screw is starting to round off at all, don't continue, because once you lose that head, you've got no way of getting it apart. What you're going to need then is a block of wood. And you're going to sit that screw directly over your block of wood. Hold it square. Still won't go. Live TV, nothing like it. There we go. And that's how you do it. I'm really pleased that it did go eventually. So, take that screw out. Now you want your pry bar again, which I left, oh sorry, no, now we've got the 10mm bolts on the other side. For that I'm using a 3/8 drive. The reason is if I used a 1/2 inch I can't get to this one round here. 3/8 will go in there just nice. And this is what these are for. You can get your pry bar in there, and again, because it's aluminium, it's very soft, so just give it a gentle wiggle. If it feels like it's not going to come apart, try another spot and keep on going till the whole thing comes apart. That's a nice easy one. Excellent. So we're going to discard this part. This is the damaged water pump, and we're going to reuse this part. So now we're back again to removing all the old gasket. Now this is going to take some time, so I'm not going to show the whole thing on video, but beautiful TV, sometimes you can pre-prepare. And where did I put it? Yeah. Here's one I prepared earlier. Now this one I actually stuck in the sandblaster and gave this a good clean up. It is a second-hand one off an old water pump, but it's more than adequate to reuse, and I cleaned it up purely for aesthetic reasons. So in just a second I'll clear all this stuff away and we'll start on the reassembly. After you've cleaned up your old casing, if you find that you've got any pitting, real serious pitting in the mating surface, I'm afraid you're going to have to discard this and you can't reuse it, because the water pressure itself under temperature is going to force its way out of all of those little pits. So make sure you've got a nice clean surface. Also, after you've scraped the gasket, just as a final clean, that's what the stone was for. Get yourself a piece of wet and dry paper, wet it, put your plate on there, you'll feel that it's a nice flat surface, and just gently move it around, and it'll just give you that final clean and a nice smooth finish. Even though this still looks dirty, you can't feel anything with your nail, there's no pitting in there, it's a beautiful mirror finish ready to go on. Now this is one of those jobs, you do it properly or you do it twice. I prefer to do it properly because this is a full day's work to replace this water pump, and if you find you didn't clean those mating surfaces properly and it leaks, that's another full day's work you've got to spend stripping it all down again just to do the job for a second time. So just do it properly the first time. So now let's get it back together. Your new pump will come with a new gasket. Because a brand new pump has a machined surface, it's not going to have any imperfections, and that gasket is going to go on and seal tight without any additional adhesives. Because this is not a brand new machined surface, and there may still be slight micro pores that aren't sealing, you can use a smear of RTV sealant. Now when I say a smear, I do mean the finest smear. You do not want too much, because when you put the two surfaces together, any additional liquid is going to squirt out and it'll restrict the flow of water. It also looks untidy. So it is just the tiniest smear on any surfaces. I've seen some of these where they put on so much that once they'd pushed the two together, it had blocked some of the pore holes, some of the holes, the flow holes, and actually restricted the water unbelievable amounts. And they wondered why it was overheating. So that's it, barely visible, just a very, very fine coat. And this will also help to hold the gasket in place while you make the two halves together. Beautiful. Now we get our new pump. Put the two halves together. And we're going to start off with that really tight screw. Now I'm not going to do it fully tightened down at this point, just enough to get it into place. Just to there. Then we'll turn this over and start putting all these bolts back in. Now if you only do all the bolts finger tight on your first time round, this makes sure all the holes all line up perfectly and you don't have to adjust anything. Okay, now we can start doing things up. You need your 10mm. And first one I'm going to do is this screw. And if you remember, it was done up extremely tight, so I'm going to do the same. Flip it over, check all your holes all still line up beautifully, and now start doing all these up. Now Mitsubishi don't actually give a tension for these, and I remember when I undone them they wasn't done up very tight, so all we're going to do is just a little bit beyond a nip, just to make sure they don't work loose. There we go. Now we're ready to refit it. So I'll cut the video a second, we'll go over to the car, ready for the next part. Okay, so we're almost ready to refit the water pump, but just before we do, your replacement water pump should have come with a new O-ring that goes around this pipe here. Water flows through this pipe into the water pump and then out of the water pump into one hole here and one hole on this side in the main block. So first of all, I'm just going to clean up a little bit in this pipe, and then there's a little tool that I forgot to mention. You're going to need a hook tool to get underneath that rubber ring. Peel the ring off. Now, I have seen on occasion where the area where the ring sits into is seriously corroded. In fact, I'm going to get you one of these pipes and show you on video what the pipe looks like when you take it out. Just give me a second. Now I've gone and picked up one of these pipes. You can see exactly what the problem is. The O-ring was around here, and quite often you get rust build up in this groove here, and that rust stops the new O-ring sealing properly. So I strongly recommend you clean the best you can around that ring, and then use some RTV sealant around in that groove just to make sure you get a really good seal. The tube itself is bolted from the other end, so in order to remove this tube you've got to remove an awful lot of equipment the other end. So hopefully this isn't too bad and you manage to seal it without removing the tube. So I've done my best with a rag just to clean that up. It doesn't actually look too bad on this one. And now I'm going to get some RTV and just try and smear that around the tube a little bit where the gasket's going to go. I think that's got it. And I just dropped the gasket. And I can't see where it went. Right, found the O-ring. We'll pop the O-ring on there. And just clean up any surplus from around the edges, just to keep it tidy. And then on the water pump side, I'm just going to put a thin smear in there as well, just to give that little bit of added protection, given that these are now second-hand parts, used parts that are not going to be quite as perfect as the day they was originally made. And it is just a thin smear on there, just to give that added protection. And then finally, you would have got one of these new gaskets. Just check hole alignment. I have had the odd one that doesn't quite line up properly. And once again, because this is a used part, we'll put that super thin smear on there as well. Do not block the waterways. So I believe that's about it. Water should not be anywhere around here unless there's a leak. It should only be travelling through this hole and this hole. I can now put this gasket onto here and it will be held in place by the sealant. Makes life a bit easier for us. And with the other surface on the main block itself, this one shouldn't have any imperfections because it's a really good iron and it's come up nice and smooth. We spent a lot of time cleaning all that area, but still, just to be 100% sure, given the age of the car, we'll just get that thin smear around the hole as well. Okay, now we're ready to put the water pump back on. Now remember, when you go to put this on, you've got to line up that hole with the tube first. So we'll slide this down into position. Hopefully you don't knock the gasket as you go down. And line it up with the tube. There we go, that drops straight into place. Now we need to be sure that the gaskets haven't moved. So one by one we'll put the bolts in. Now if you recall, I told you when we disassembled it that one of these bolts is slightly shorter. So we're going to start with the slightly shorter bolt, which seems to be this one. And that goes into this top hole here. That's the first one that's gone in nicely. Now we can try one on this side. That's also gone in. Now we can put the other three in. And the one final one, which is hidden down the back here. Good. Now I'm going to try and do all of these up with my fingers, just to pull the pump in as close as possible. And now you can see this top one's lined up ready for us to put this one in. Okay, now we're going to need our torque wrench, and that's set to 24 Newton meters, around 15 pounds. And we're going to start doing these bolts up. The manual doesn't seem to show any particular order. Now all I'm going to do is just 2 of them first of all, but I'm not going to do them up to full tension. I'm just going to get them to nip very slightly, but in such a way that they will be able to move if pulled. What this allows us to do now is do up this top bolt, knowing full well that it's going to be in the right position to do it up. And now we can continue doing the rest of the bolts up. It hardly took any pressure at all to bring that up to the right tension. I'm just going to do a second pass. 1, 2, 3, 4. I missed one. Is it that one? That's it. I'm very happy with that. That's all gone exactly as it should have done. Nice and smooth, no complications, and job done. Now, of course, from this point, there's two things we can do. We can refill with coolant, and of course, we've got to put the timing belt back on. Now, at this point, I'm not going to do either of those jobs because, first of all, the timing belt is covered in a second video. So now you need to switch over to part 2 of the cam belt change video. And in that same video, I will also replace all the coolant to finish off the job completely. So for now, that's this video done. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's been useful to you. Don't forget to watch all my other videos, and if you like them, give us a thumbs up. Feel free to comment, and if you click on the bell, you'll get automatic updates on all of the future videos. Now, if you'd like me to do a video for you, I'm happy to do videos for people as soon as I can, but I must ask you to not request them on the YouTube channel, but go onto my forum. The name's at the bottom of the screen, and on the forum there is a section there for requesting a video. This way I can keep all of the video requests in the same place. It's easier for me to look down the list and see which videos are requested and which ones would work best with whatever I'm doing at that time. So for now, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you on the next video.